Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
This evening for hour one is author, educator, and SafeHouse mom for human trafficking, Marcie Friesner. She's going to talk to us about the holiday season and mental health. And then for hour two, the 8 o'clock hour, I'm going to speak with Marine and Army veteran Matthew Reed is going to talk to us about how the UFO issue may connect to other national security issues. I thought that would be an interesting topic to talk about. Just something kind of fun, but also kind of scary. But before we do that, we will do a little bit of news. It appears that in November, home sales have toppled some 7%, which is not a good thing, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Certainly, the rise in interest rates are one of the things, I should say is one of the things that has contributed to the falling of home sales. Hopefully, we're not in for, another housing bubble, another housing collapse. But it's the 10th straight month in a row that there's been a decline. So that is something to be concerned about. Sales are actually down 35.4% year over year, marking the 10th straight month in declines. The median sales price of homes rose 3.5% to $370,000 per home over a year ago. So all of those things are a little bit concerning, because that means that, as there is scarcity in the market, not as many homes are available. That means that the price of housing tends to go up, and less people have the opportunity to buy homes. So that's just something to look at. And when you look at, the fact that we have all of these things are indicators as to how well the economy is doing. So you look at these kind of little markers, so to speak, these little things that are going on, and you say to yourself, how well is the economy doing? If you're a realtor, I guess the high prices of houses is a good thing, but if there's scarcity in the market, then you don't have as many houses to sell. So that can be a challenge, obviously. But that's just something to look at, something to think about. It's really, with the rise in interest rates, it's really not an awesome time to buy a home. And that's probably a lot of the reason why it's gone down. Sorry, my interwebs is super slow today. I have all these notes, but my internet is very, very slow. So I apologize for the slowness in reporting. In Congress, they are looking at passing another ridiculously huge spending bill, which I am very unhappy about, because, the Republicans are supposed to be the fiscally responsible people. They're supposed to be the ones that don't want to spend a whole lot of money. And then there's this huge bill coming up of them spending more and more money, and not one dime in there for border security, by the way, not one single solitary dime for border security, when they are expecting to do away with this law. I forget what the name of it is off the top of my head, but the law kept people from coming in illegally who might have had health challenges because of COVID. Now, what's interesting about that is, and what part of what I never understand about the government is, why do you have to make that law when it's already illegal to come in a country not in the proper way? Like, it was already illegal. So why do you need an additional law saying it's especially illegal now because of COVID? Seems like the first law would have covered that. But, what do I know? Consumer prices in a good news, bad news kind of situation. Sorry, forgive me, I have a little bit of a cold. Consumer prices rose less than expected in November, up 7.1% from a year ago. So it's kind of a good news, bad news thing, right? So the prices rose less than expected, but they didn't not rise. So like that's a problem. But it only rose 1% from the previous month and increased 7.1% from a year ago compared with the respective estimates. So the economists were wrong again. A lot of these predictions tend to be wrong, and this is just another example of that. Core CPI, which is also known as the Customer Price Index, rose 2% on the month and 6% on an annual basis compared with the estimates that I talked about earlier. Stocks roared higher following that report as investors took that as a sign that inflation might be ebbing or slowing down, which doesn't mean inflation is not still high. Like inflation went down like 1% last month, but it's still super high over last year. Like it was at 8.5. So if it's at 7.5, that's still not awesome. The inflation adjusted average hourly earnings for workers rose 0.5% for the month, though they were still down 1.9% over a year ago. And the reason why they always mention raises when we talk about inflation is you want to kind of be able to measure where you are as far as how much your money will buy, how much is your money actually worth. So if inflation is higher than your rise in income, then you're at a deficit. If your rise in income is higher than inflation, then you are actually making money. So if you're wondering why you're making so much more money, but for some reason you can't buy as much, that's the reason why. It's because inflation is so much higher. Now, here's some good news for people applying to school. Pell Grants are going to get a raise, so to speak. So if you qualify for a Pell Grant, they are increasing it to $7,395, and that's starting next year, and that's the biggest increase in over a decade. It's part of that massive spending package that I spoke about earlier, the $1.7 trillion spending package for 2023 that Congress is working on right now. They're going to try to nail that down before Christmas. I don't know if it's going to happen. We'll see. But it's a $500 increase for those that qualify. And like I said, it's the largest jump in a decade. And of course, people, need that kind of help if you're low income. And then the Pell Grant is very helpful as far as making sure you are able to get your education. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. And when we come back, we'll have guest Marcie Friesner.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest the first hour is Marcie Friesner. She's going to talk to us about the holiday season and mental health. Marcie received her BSED from Ohio Dominican University and has taught for over 29 years. She currently resides and serves in Swansboro, North Carolina, where she is the director of Salt and Light Academy, a faith-based educational setting for grades K through 12, and is an ordained pastor serving TJ's, which is an outreach mission named after the biblical prophets Timothy and Jeremiah. Marcie Friesner has committed her life to encourage, educate, and empower others in a multifaceted career and ministry. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Marcie Friesner to the show. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me, Marcie? Oh, let's see if we can get Marcie back. I'm very excited to talk to her. She has a new book coming out called His Child. It's a 40-day devotional book. And the reason why I'm bringing up this topic is because mental health is a very serious topic as the holidays roll around. It tends to be the time of the year when people are most stressed if you're having mental health issues. And it's also a good time to kind of check in mentally and see how well you are doing, because it can be a very stressful time. If you are missing a loved one or something like that, that it can be a sad time of the year. So it's a good idea to check in with your mental health during this time of year. So I'm excited to have her on the show. We'll see if we can get her back in a moment. Another thing that she talks about is making sure that the isolation that can come along with the holiday season and the importance of doing a mental health check, because it is a tough time of the year. Marcie has done a lot of work with teens and the increase in teen suicide, particularly post-COVID. I think we have Marcie back. Marcie, are you back? Hello?
Hey, Melanie, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you fine. I apologize. How are you this evening?
I am fabulous. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm very glad to talk to you, and I think the timing is really good, especially with the holidays rolling around, Christmas coming up this weekend, and New Year's the next weekend. So I'm very glad to talk to you. Is there anything in your bio that I didn't mention that you'd like the audience to know about?
I think you hit the wickets. I think that was great. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. So, when I was doing research for the show this evening, I was taking a look at some statistics regarding mental health and the accessibility of mental health in America, and it was really concerning. I had no idea of these statistics. One that I ran into said 1 in 5 Americans has some type of mental health condition, and that mental health treatment and services reached $225 billion in 2019. This is according to the Open Minds Market Intelligence Report. And as I said in my open, I would imagine that this is particularly so when the pressures of the holidays rolls around.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things right out the gate I would just go ahead and put out there is this 988. If you're not aware of it, it's a mental health crisis phone number, so similar to 911. Your listeners can use 988 when they're in a mental health crisis. The statistics are rather alarming. You're an educator. I currently run a one-room classroom, 2nd through 12th grade, but am in year 29 of education. And I would say, a lot of what we're seeing is the fact that we are not addressing what kids need. Kids just aren't getting to be kids anymore. And so then that multiplies and that snowballs into other things. So when I look at, say, for instance, my classroom, my students know that their phone is going to be taken during the school day. They can have it in an emergency. But I know a lot of our social media, not just as kids, but we're throwing it in kids' faces earlier. But our phones, are locked down on videos, and the difference between what's reality and what's not just makes all of this stuff in our brain very gray and very confusing, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, it does make sense. It does make sense. And when I was doing my research, I also saw that the number that I talked about earlier is a 52% rise since 2009. And that is really insane. And people might be asking, why are we talking about this on Money Talk with Melanie? Because all of these things are associated with money. Another stat that I saw is that depression alone is estimated to account for $44 billion in losses to workplace productivity. So if you think this has nothing to do with money or that mental health issues are not money associated, they certainly are.
Right. Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right. And depression is the number one leading cause of suicide and attempted suicides. So the sooner we can talk about that and understand how to help people, give them the hope that they need, especially during the holiday season. Like, it probably seems like it's obvious. There's hope everywhere. I mean, my kids and I are exploring New York today and tomorrow. Specifically came from North Carolina to New York just to see the lights on the tree in Rockefeller Center. That is one of those things that seems very hopeful. We are very excited just to see the lights on the tree. But that is not the case for everybody. And for many, it's the opposite. They don't look forward to the holidays. I was talking with a friend recently whose father died on Christmas. So while we should look forward to Thanksgiving, we should look forward to Christmas, it's family time, it's Hallmark movies, the reality is that for most Americans, it's just not that hopeful. So we've got to press in even harder to look out for one another and to be that hope.
Exactly, especially around the holidays. Some people who are lonely or suffer from loneliness feel it especially so around the holidays. Right. And here's another money statistics for you in the audience. You probably already know this, Marcie. But this is just a comparison of illnesses. Okay. It costs $4,800 on average to manage diabetes, taking insulin and things like that. In comparison, to manage major depression is $10,836 a year. So that, and that's on average. So when you think about, what it costs to manage certain chronic conditions and depression, and anxiety could certainly be a chronic condition that you just deal with for your entire life. And that's, if you don't have the means to pay for that, it can be a problem.
Right. Yeah. Well, and, another challenge that we face is that we are not actually helping people in the mental health crisis to get to the root of that mental illness. As a believer, I certainly stand on my faith, and I have seen breakthroughs, but I also have to walk that line. My reality and my spirituality, they have to come together in certain places. That has been a real challenge for me, until, for instance, my father received his breakthrough with his chemical imbalance in the brain. I have to figure out how I'm going to set healthy boundaries, and I have to figure out how I can push him in healthy ways without discouraging him to get help. And a lot of our systems are thriving on more medication and more medication and more medication. So we end up in this cycle of, I know that I worked in a SafeHouse for women, and I'm looking at the number of meds that these women are taking for all of these symptoms related to trauma.
Right.
So we've got to back it up to the trauma. And so I think, the major expense comes in because we're just saying, oh, wait, that's not enough. Their depression is greater. Their anxiety is greater. Let's increase the dosage, which means more money out of pocket for the medication or more money from the insurance company or whatever the case may be. The dollars still add up. Or the treatment facilities. We do not have the number of treatment facilities that we really need. And so we're pushing there again. There's an even greater budget. Where does that money come from? How do we help those who need to get into a facility and that facility is completely full and there's nothing except states away?
Indeed. And to your point, one of the things I read today that was really stunning and sad to me is that mental health and substance abuse use treatment centers and clinics tend to be concentrated in urban areas, but rural parts of the country tend not to have as much access. In fact, 112 million Americans live in areas where mental health providers are scarce. So, and they mentioned some states, Missouri, Arizona, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington, in particular, have low rates when it comes to meeting the mental health needs of residents. The area that I live in has that same issue. You would think with the advancement with telemed that more people would have more access.
Right.
But it doesn't. It's still like I see a couple people on my social media talking about having a hard time finding someone to talk to, and I was thinking to myself, well, can't you do it through telemed? I guess you have to have certain kinds of insurance for that to happen.
There's all kinds of challenges. There's all kinds of red tape. The other thing is when you reach someone, say, for instance, a person that I've been helping for a little while now in a mental health crisis who hasn't quite gotten that schizophrenia under control, how do we help a person in that situation because they're homeless, they're struggling, but then to try to get help, they understand how to work all of that, right? So they understand how to say the right things, or this person doesn't want to set up a voicemail on their phone. So I've reached out to mental health providers, but if this person won't answer their phone, or how about those people that are, their family members are affected, they're living in denial, right? I don't have that thing. I want to laugh because I know two people where a husband says his wife is bipolar, the wife says her husband's bipolar. You know, like, we throw these things out there, and we really need to reel in, and we really need to figure out where the gaps are. And that's why I think this 988 number is crucial. There are mobile crisis units all over. I know Trillium is a big mental health provider. I think the sooner we can get more information out there to people, and the sooner we can get them connected. And then you had talked about the mental health check, which I had said. It's not hopeless, right? I mean, until that person is no longer on this earth, it's not hopeless. So I continue to check in with my people, even if it doesn't seem like the resources are right here and now. I still check in with them. I still make sure that they have hope for that day until that they reach, that crossroads where they can get into the facility and get the help that they need.
It's very challenging. Is there a way for us to do our own mental health checks, like check in with ourselves? Is that possible? But I don't know. When you're not necessarily well,
Right.
It's probably hard to be in your own head, right?
It is, but we have authority. God's word says that we can take every thought captive, and I know that to be true, whether you're a believer or not. I recently did the Trinity Health Freedom Expo in Chicago and met a lot of really neat people, not everyone a Christian. I've talked to I have students who are living in this new agey. Regardless, my point is,
yes,
your thoughts have the ability to control your brain, and the sooner we learn that, because I actually only just recently learned that, probably a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Knowing that your thoughts control your brain and not the other way around.
Yes.
So the sooner we learn that, I find myself like, I'll give you just one very simple example. My father was just a rage on the roads, right? That road rage was crazy with him. So I vowed that I was never going to even come close to being like that. So if a driver's really close to my bumper, I just put my rear view mirror up so that I can't see the driver anymore. Or I put it down so I can see something that simple. So instead of getting agitated that person is driving really close to me, I say, thank you, Lord, for this beautiful day. And I start looking at what's going on in front of me. I tell my kids, I tell my students, I tell everybody who will listen to me, if you will look out the windshield instead of looking in the rearview mirror for your life, right? So that's present day. If I'm dealing with a struggle right here and right now, my thought patterns probably can't do a whole lot about the immediate situation, but they can change the way my whole entire body reacts to that situation. And that really does start to connect neurons and change wavelengths. And before you know it, like, I know for me personally, it's been years of practice, but almost instantly my kids will tell you, I see the positive in all kinds of things.
And that is very true. And what's neat about the Bible, you mentioned about what it says about holding your mind captive, is that even if you're not a Christian, it still works. So you can say that, like what you just said, that principle, and you just talked about how that principle works. People don't even need to know that it's a Bible principle.
Right.
And what I find very funny, not funny, haha, just kind of funny about life in general, is that there's lots of things that even these new agey people talk about that are Bible-based, that psychiatrists will talk to you about in your mental health that are Bible-based. Right. They might not even know it's Bible-based.
Yeah.
So I just think that point is very interesting. And like I said, you can still use it whether you're a Christian or not. It's still going to work. It's a universal law.
It absolutely is, yeah. And Melanie, I would add to that, the feeling of being content. We have lost how to be content, and I could go back to the phone and the television and the instantaneous gratification, the Amazon overnight, the find it on Google. But if we could take a step back, and especially in America where we have more, so we want more, so we strive for more, I would encourage your listeners to really ask themselves, what would allow me to be content in this particular situation? Where can I find some contentment in my life? I talk about self-care versus selfishness. A lot of times we mistake them, especially as moms or wives. We're like, that seems so selfish. No, it's actually really self-care to go and find a place of contentment and then sort through those thoughts. Journaling is a phenomenal, easy thing to do. Get those thoughts out there so that they don't control you. You are controlling them.
And it does help to get things out of your brain and onto paper. And I actually just had an aha moment when you said that. And here it is, which is now I've heard for years about the importance of journaling. And I've bucked against it. In fact,
easier said than done, right?
Yeah, well, yes. So my sister bought me a journal, I want to say last Christmas, a beautiful journal, because she, wants to encourage me to do it. And I'm like, no. But I religiously use my to-do list. And here's the reason why is what I just said, that if you get it out of your head, you're not stressed out about it anymore. And I'm like, oh.
Right.
When you just talked about journaling, I'm like, oh, that's why the journaling, because I don't get stressed out about the number of things on my to-do list, and it's extensive. Like it's ridiculous. Even when I look at, and mine gives me stats and stuff like that. Like right now, in the last 30 days, you've created 300. I'm literally looking at it right now. 350 tasks completed in the last 30 days. 199 completion rate, 56%. That could stress you out.
Wow. Yeah.
But I know it's right here, and I don't have to keep all that stuff in my head. So
the positivity in me is saying, Melanie, 56%. That means the 54% that isn't done is so small compared to the 56%. Let's go with it, right? I mean,
yes, but I'm thinking
56% undone and 54.
I'm like, aha. That's why the journaling. We're up against the. I'm glad that this show was worth it just for that. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. My guest this hour is Marcie Friesner. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Unemployed or underemployed? Have no fear, the TaxMama is here. Fuel your best career move with TaxMama. TaxMama can help you become an IRS enrolled agent with our next live 6-month course beginning in May 2023. Or you can start now with on-demand courses. It's your career on your schedule. Job opportunities are plentiful. TaxMama offers unlimited access to her tax mentoring portal with all the testing materials you need to overcome any test anxiety. Get your 3-year tax education in 6 months and become an IRS enrolled agent through the TaxMama. Visit irsexams.school. That's irsexams.school now to get your best career started today. Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
This is important because it's your money. Your money. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest this hour is Marcie Friesner, and we're talking to her about mental health during the holidays and the costs of mental health. We were talking about all of these different situations and really mostly referring to adults, but certainly there's been a huge rise in suicide among teens and among young adults. What do you attribute to as to the cause of those things?
Yeah. Well, first, let me tell you, the 2020 statistics for the United States per 100,000, ages 10 to 14 is 2.8. Then when you bump up one age bracket, ages 15 to 24, you bump all the way up to 14.2 per 100,000. So 7 times what it is for kids younger than that. One, again, my good friend Eden Gordon-Hill and I talk about this a good bit, the phone. You're looking at teenagers and tweens who have more access to more detrimental information. The cyberbullying is out of control, the negativity on social media in general. So while it can be a good thing that you have instant contact with mom or dad in an emergency, you can call grandma on the weekend, whatever the case may be, we really, really need to be careful with what we're exposing our children to so early in life. And then I think our education system has really gotten out of whack. I am very privileged to be where I'm at and to be able to have my own classroom and to love the whole child. Actually saw one of my students out in public a few days ago, and he was with a buddy that I didn't know, and he introduced me to his buddy, and then we were getting ready to leave, and he said, "I love you, Miss Marcie," and I said, "Love you too, bud." Like, just the fact that my students know there's healthy boundaries set in place, but they know that I have their back. They know that in a crisis situation, they can call me. Actually, one of them called me yesterday, and just he was so distraught. And he said, "Can you please pray for me?" And I said, "What's going on?" This is a sophomore in high school. He said, "I'm just really sick." And so I thought, wow, that he would want to do that, for one. I mean, so I would go back to, again, mental health checks. So I know we have some absentee parents right now. I know it's very hard for our children, but whoever those, if you're a guardian to your grandchildren, if you're fostering children, wherever there are children in your sphere of influence, you've got to ask them how they're doing. You've got to talk about what is on their plate right now. What are they dealing with that has them stressed out? And the other thing we have to be really careful not to do is invalidate what they say. She didn't mean that, or, he was probably just goofing off. Make sure that you validate what they've said and then help them with some coping skills.
Right. And I think that's what is lacking. I'm a former educator. Actually, now I work on public policy, which is great. But but one of the reasons why I'm no longer a teacher is because when kids come to you in a public school setting, you can't encourage them to pray. Right. They ask you, well, what would you do in this situation? And the first thing I would do is pray. You can't say that in a public school. You can say every other thing that is as anti-Christian as possible, but you can't tell them to pray. When I taught public school, I taught financial literacy, and one day I was teaching about scams, and I was asking a question about why it's wrong to scam people. And I could not impress upon some of these kids why that was wrong. And right. I finally said to them, and I was like, well, I'll just have to deal with the backlash, that it is displeasing to whatever God you serve, whoever you believe in. It is not okay. Like, if none of the other penalties and things bother you, understand this, that there are universal laws that are set up to address those things, and it never turns out well. Right. Understand that. Now, it didn't come back to me. Sometimes you have to, stand out on a leap of faith. But there are some things for which the only explanation is a relationship with God, and in public school, they don't allow you to do that. And it is very, to me, I find it to be a problem. Especially if a kid asks you, which this happens as a teacher, it happens all the time. If a kid asks you about something personal and about how do you do things, how do you deal with this, how do you navigate? And a lot of times my answer is, because I know God's got me, so I'm not worried about it. Right. You know what I mean? Right. But you got to be real careful saying that to people's kids. So, which is a shame.
It honestly, it's another one of those things. It depends on what state you're in. It depends on what county within that state. I mean, I have seen this time and time again. When I was teaching algebra in a public school in North Carolina, I actually didn't withhold any of that. But the principal of the school didn't withhold his Christian faith and how strong of a believer he was. And that's why so many parents wanted their kids at his school, because they knew not only were the kids going to be protected, but they were getting a stellar education. This was a phenomenal principal. He had umpteen decades of experience, and everybody knew his name and loved him. He was at every event, so his moral integrity played a huge role in him being such a good administrator and then having such an incredible staff. So it kind of depends on where you are.
Oh, it certainly does. I'm in New Jersey. I'm hardly in the Bible Belt. So, but yeah, and they are very like weird about that kind of stuff. But they're not weird about anything that is in opposition to Christian beliefs. They try to get you to do that, and I'm like, are we inclusive or not? And whenever we talk about inclusivity and things like that in the public school setting, we never talk about including Christians. We talk about including a lot of different religions, unless it's a Christian religion, which I think is just very bizarre.
Yeah.
But I also don't think, I think that the parenting styles, and I'd love to know what you think about this, of these previous couple of generations, has been very, like helicopter style. They're not allowed to feel any kind of discomfort or anything, or develop any coping mechanisms whatsoever. They're not allowed to fail or fall. And I think that what happens when you become a young adult and life starts doing what life does, they have no experience with how to handle it, and they kind of immediately like, I don't want to be here anymore.
You're exactly right. You just hit the nail on the head. It's that everybody gets a trophy phase, right? I mean, we still kind of do it today, but you're right. We have done them a huge disservice because we have not taught them how to deal with disappointment. And so they slink further and further into the disappointment, so much so that something as simple as not getting a participation trophy for being the last place runner sends you, into a tizzy. So you're right. We've got to change. I call it healthy exposure because even though I have a Christian school and it's a one-room classroom, believe me, these kids are exposed to things. They're exposed to stuff. There's no way around it. But Miss Marcie's going to talk about it. I mean, I'm just going to come right out and talk about drugs, sex, and rock and roll.
Right, because it's all out there.
Yeah.
It's all out there. But yeah, I think that parents are, and it's a bad combination, right? Because we have, the information age that we live in and access to information and all these things that influence them. And then at the same time, we're not practicing resilience and consequences for making bad decisions. And when I was a teacher, I used to tell parents, listen, now is the time to let them mess up. Because parents want to protect their kids from like everything. And I'm like, let him eat that F. If he didn't it's better for him to eat the F as a ninth grader than float through high school and get into college and start eating the F, and it's going to cost you a couple $1,000s.
Right.
Let there be a consequence now for not doing your work. That's when there should be. And then have him have to take that class over next year.
Correct.
If that's what he's going to do.
The mom of an 8th grade boy who failed 8th grade, and mom was begging the school to make him repeat it, and the principal refused.
Oh, yeah, because it's bad for his numbers.
It blew my mind. I just really didn't understand.
Oh, listen, I could tell stories, and I probably will in my upcoming book called The Angry Educator. But that's just
right. Author that one together, Melanie.
Yeah, you like that? Like how I slid that in there? Yeah, there's going to be a book, and depending on how much you ticked me off determines whether or not I'm going to mention your name. I'm just kidding. Not spiteful like that. Well, I am, but I don't follow through. I just have spiteful thoughts. But you know what I could do?
Circles us right back around. The devotional that S.A. Moore and I wrote, I talk about your people, your places, your things. So just like that, if you're an angry educator, don't surround yourself with a bunch of angry educators.
Which is nearly impossible because a lot of them are angry.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But we've got to find good people who can build us up and encourage us while we're in it. I think, like for you, when you've distanced yourself from education, go ahead and spew as much as you need to, because it's not going to affect, you're not in a classroom where it's going to affect your students in the here and now. That would be where I would draw a line.
For sure. But, I think that part of the challenge when you are very frustrated and when you're frustrated with the bureaucracy, right?
Yeah.
Is to not spew that onto your students. You certainly
Correct.
don't want to do that. But what that means is you're carrying it yourself. And that's not good for your mental health, just to kind of circle back, right? That is not good for your, and ultimately, when I finally left, people were shocked. They were like, you were made to do that. And I'm like, well, I'm still doing it, just in a different venue. And I'm working on education policies. So it's just a little different. But, they were like, the kids really needed you. And I'm like, not where I was going. They didn't.
Right.
And if something is affecting your mental health like that, it's time to go. So you have a few suggestions as to what to do, how you can check in on your friends and just make sure that they're doing okay mentally. What are some things that you can do?
Well, first off, we need to go back to even having a relationship with those people, going beyond a text or phone call. Those are great. Don't misunderstand me. And even if they go unresponded to, because of the nature of what I do with men and women in recovery, so many of them come back to me and appreciate the fact that I texted them or called them, even if they didn't respond. So just knowing, your people knowing that there is somebody out there that loves them and is advocating for them is huge. But I would take it a step further, and I would, no kidding, meet with those people. My sister recently lost her son. My 28-year-old nephew died of an overdose.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. January will be his birthday. But we're already, Thanksgiving without my nephew, and first Christmas is coming without my nephew. So she's actually here in New York herself because she was like, you know what? I have got to get out. I got to check out of where I'm at in my house and in my reality and do something different. So I would encourage people to do that, to think outside the box, if you will, and do, if we could bring the spontaneity back. These, kill them with kindness, my mother always said. It's the hardest thing to give away because it's usually returned. Random acts of kindness, never underestimate those. So I like to do that. When I know somebody is struggling, even the slightest bit, I am going to take chocolates over, or I am going to check on them beyond just a text or a phone call. And one of the things I like to say, too, is you've got to be real, Melanie. Quit putting your best makeup face on and your best self, because these people need to see the hurt you and the broken you that's also trying to walk this out. That's more helpful to them than the all put together you.
That is so very true. I tell this story all the time, but heck, I'm going to tell it again. How on social media, a person commented on, I posted some pictures, and a person said, your life seems so glamorous. Right? And I was like, ma'am, I am doing it wrong, if that's what you think. And so it really just was like a red flag to me to start posting some more, just not all the time, not like make my page a downer or whatever, but every now and then just post when I'm having a struggle. Because it absolutely does happen, but nobody posts when they are balled up in a corner crying all weekend. That post never makes Facebook. You know what I mean? Right. But it happens. And so, people, you have to understand, even like the most glorious, glamorous life that you see on social media is just what people want you to see. It's kind of like TV and movies, right? If you've ever done any TV and movies, one of the first lessons they tell you when you take acting classes is that nothing you see on TV or a movie is by accident. Every little detail is on purpose. Incidentally, I'm involved in politics, and it is the same with politics as well. Nothing is by accident at all. And so it's important, like you said, to be real, to every now and then, just bear it all. No makeup, sneakers. It's all right. I mean, that is inevitably when somebody that's really cute you run into that you like will see you at 2:00 in the morning with no makeup on in your pajamas, doing a a convenience store run, but that's okay. Oh, I ran into my crush. Awesome. But
it always happens that way, doesn't it?
It does, but it's really important. So tell us about how the His Child 40-day devotional can help us and where we can find it as we are closing out the hour.
Thank you. Yeah, one of S.A.'s favorite words is hot messery. So we talk about getting out of our hot messery and getting real with God. so it is really written to anybody. We have kind of a target audience because working with people in recovery, and then SA has some criminal history. My brother is currently serving time.
Oh, wow.
My nephew was facing time before he lost his life. And my brother actually keeps requesting more and more copies. He's trying to share them with as many people as he can in the prison that he's in Ohio. And then, so that said, I also have some great people who aren't struggling in that regard, but are really growing in their faith and growing in their perspective by reading it as well. So we say, S.A. calls himself the sinner and he calls me the saint. So we're writing from both perspectives.
But I like that. I think that's good. Diversity of thought is always good. I don't care what the mainstream media tells you.
Yeah, I mean, it's blended very well, and it's available on all of your Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all of those .coms. So it's very easy to get a hold of.
Excellent. Is there anywhere we can follow you on social media or anything like that? Do you have a blog or anything?
I have on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. It will be Marcie Jean Writes. So it's MarcieJeanWrites. Marcie Jean Writes on all of those platforms.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marcie. Great job. Very encouraging. I hope everybody gets out there and picks up His Child, the 40-day devotional. Thank you so much for being on the show this evening.
Melanie, thank you for tackling this topic. I really hope more and more people will follow suit and do that as well. So thank you for that. I'm sure it is an encouragement to many.
You're very welcome. Merry Christmas. Have a great New Year.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. We're rolling into the second hour, the 8 o'clock hour. If you missed the first hour, the 7 p.m. hour, shame on you. You missed author, educator, and SafeHouse mom for human trafficking, Marcie Friesner, who talked to us about the cost of mental health during the holidays. Just a really great conversation on things that you can do to help people who could possibly be in a mental health crisis, people who have challenges during the holidays, just some really good information, and some information too about how costly mental health can be, and the need to have more mental health facilities and mental health opportunities for people to deal with their trauma and with the things that's causing their mental health breakdown. If you missed it, you can catch it again on Money Talk with Melanie, the podcast. The show will be downloaded as a podcast here on 98.7 The Coast website, or anywhere where you get your favorite podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts or Audible or something like that. So make sure that you get it. Also, if you follow me on social media, such as Twitter at Money Talk Mel, or Facebook at Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast, or even my show page on LinkedIn, which is also Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast. Some of the articles and advice and things I talk about with the economy and personal finance all lands there, as well as links to the podcast when they are posted, and upcoming guests. So make sure that you check that out. Our guest for the second hour is Marine and Army veteran Matthew Reed. He's going to talk to us about how the UFO issue may connect with other national security issues. Now, you might be thinking, what is she talking about, UFOs? If you have not been paying attention, you should pay attention to this hour. I know it sounds crazy and creepy and kind of woo-woo, but wait till I bring this guest on. You'll see what I'm talking about. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit more about the news. I ran into this article on Kiplinger's website that talked about the financial literacy crisis that we have in America. And the article said that addressing America's financial literacy crisis begins at home. And as someone who taught financial literacy and economics for 12 years, I could not possibly agree more. Parents, you all are the first place that kids look and observe how you deal with finances. And how do I know? Because when I taught financial literacy, I would ask introductory warm-up questions and things like that. And a lot of the answers, I'm sure, were coming from what they observed in their parents. And a lot of them were not good. I'm just saying. And I'm like, whoa, this is not good. I actually had a student come to me once and tell me that their mother said that they didn't need the financial literacy class because all you do, we live in a resort area, you just work during the on season and go on unemployment during the off season, and boom, financial literacy. And I was like, ma'am, that is not it at all. That is not it at all as far as a long-term plan is concerned. So what can you do as a parent? You can talk to your kids about money. This is important. Education always starts at home. Believe it or not, this is kind of old school thinking, but you are, as a parent, your child's first teacher. You are your child's first teacher. ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, all of that before they get to kindergarten. You know, these are, and things need to be talked about at home. If you rely on the public school system to teach your kid everything about life and learning, you're doing your kids a disservice. Trust and believe me. So it's never too early to start teaching kids about money and about the value of money and that things cost money. I highly recommend making sure they have some skin in the game. So this comes to step 2. And before I even move on to step 2, the statistics say that only 28% of parents currently talk to their kids about money. This is according to a study by Boeing, Employees Credit Union. That is pretty sad, and it's not acceptable. But I find that a lot of adults don't know good financial literacy, and maybe that's why they're not talking to their kids about it and not teaching their kids because they don't actually know what to teach. So step 2, create an at-home project. This is a hands-on experience. You can set up a learning project at home. It's a good way to get your kids to start thinking about being financially responsible by having them be able to earn money and save a portion of their money and spend their money on different things. That way they will understand making those kinds of decisions. Step 3, make a formal education of financial literacy important. Now, only at the time when I started teaching financial lit, only 6 states in the country required financial literacy as a graduation requirement. I believe it's more. I think it's up to like 13, something like that. The latest statistics say that a number of states, this speaks to what I was saying, that require high school students to take personal finance increased by 24% from 2018 to 2020. So that is a good idea. And in fact, October recently became the largest state to require a financial literacy test for high schoolers. Now, if I had my druthers, I would also say that economics needs to be partnered with personal finance. Because if you don't, personal finance is great, don't get me wrong, it's a good thing. But if you don't understand how the economy works, and specifically the economy that you live in works, then you're not maximizing your knowledge. You're not maximizing exactly what it is that you need to do. So I thought that was an interesting article and really good advice for parents. Another thing on the personal finance front is Business Insider had an article that talked about 3 things to know if you make under 6 figures and want to retire a millionaire, according to financial planners. And believe me, I took notes. But I used to tell my students, if you guys start now, they were getting information that I wish I had when I was in high school, because I was a huge saver in high school. And had I known to invest that money, I didn't find out about investing until I was like 26. If I had known when I was 15 to start investing, I'd be a millionaire by now. I probably wouldn't be talking to you on the radio. But how sad would that be for you? One thing financial planners say is to make use of tax-efficient accounts and avoid lifestyle inflation when income rises. And what they're talking about is any opportunities that you have to stave off your tax liability, making sure you use a flexible spending account, making sure you do, if you are saving for retirement and your company matches that retirement plan, like if they say you put in 5%, we'll put in 5%, make sure you do that because you're throwing away money if you don't. These are very important things. And that speaks to the third point, which is making sure that you invest regularly, and that's weekly rather than monthly or quarterly. And you may say, how can I invest weekly? If you're not comfortable with investing, there's lots of different sites and things that will invest for you. I really like Acorns. Acorns, feel free to send me a check. I really like them because you can round up, you can multiply how many times you round up. What they do is they take your change. So say you make a purchase for $4.50 and you do a roundup. 50 cents of that will automatically go into your Acorns account, so you'll get charged a total of $5 for that purchase. That adds up really quickly. And what you can do is a multiplier. So you can say when you round up, times it by 3. That's what I do. Times it by 3. So instead of doing 50 cents, they would do $1.50. And that's $1.50 that goes into your account. When you think of the number of transactions that you do in the course of a day, right? And quite honestly, you don't even notice it. You really don't. And Acorns is a long-term investing account. So just be really wary of things like that and teach your kids about personal finance. Tell them what you know. Stop paying for everything, by the way. That's not Business Insider. That's me. Stop paying for everything. Stop paying for everything. Your kids, you pay for everything and you wonder why they don't know the value of money. Because you haven't taught them. What you've taught them is that money is easy to get because you keep paying for everything. They don't understand that it took you, you had to work 8 hours to buy that PS5. Like they don't make the connection. So stop doing that. You're not helping your kids. Just saying. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. When I come back, we'll be talking to Marine and Army veteran Matt Fried about UFOs. Woo, woo, woo.
Unemployed or underemployed? Have no fear, the TaxMama is here. Fuel your best career move with TaxMama. TaxMama can help you become an IRS enrolled agent with our next live 6-month course beginning in May 2023. Or you can start now with on-demand courses. It's your career on your schedule. Job opportunities are plentiful. TaxMama offers unlimited access to her tax mentoring portal with all the testing materials you need to overcome any test anxiety. Get your 3-year tax education in 6 months and become an IRS enrolled agent through the TaxMama. Visit irsexams.school. That's irsexams.school now to get your best career started today.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest this hour is Marine and Army veteran Matt Fried. He's going to talk to us about how the UFO issue may connect with national security issues. You may be thinking, what UFO issues? Let me tell you a bit about Matt Fried. He served on active duty in both the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army for a total of 7.5 years. He deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan before being honorably discharged. He has worked on both the operational and support sides of various U.S. military operations. He has also worked for over 8 years as an overseas government contractor in 3 different countries. His hobbies include, pay close attention because it's very good. His hobbies include hog hunting, tinkering with rifles, and reading both military history as well as the works of his chosen profession while finding creative ways to prepare for the zombie apocalypse. Because why not? And without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show Matt Fried.
Hello, Melanie. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. I'm really excited to talk to you today. And so is my producer, by the way.
Oh, outstanding.
My producer, Sam, I said, yo, Sam, I'm talking to this dude about UFOs the second hour. He's like, no way. I'm like, oh, way. This is going to be good.
All right. It will be.
Yeah. Oh, sure. It's going to be good. So is there anything that I said in your bio? Is there anything I left out that I didn't say that you'd like the audience to know about you?
Just a couple other things I would add. I also worked for 6 years in Southeastern Europe as a counterintelligence analyst, where my job was to prevent foreign intelligence services, particularly the Russians and the Chinese, from penetrating our human intelligence operations. And my other job was to help badge and credential counterintelligence agents from the U.S. Army root out and hunt down Russian double agents that have been placed within some of our operations. And without going into too much detail, we got a few scalps on our belt, and I can't say much more than that, but there it is.
I knew this was going to be good. Okay. I'm sorry. Wow. Listen, I don't say this in a trite or, in a like casual way when I say thank you for your service.
Thank you, ma'am. My pleasure.
Need people like you. Without people like you, I don't get to sit on the radio and say anything I want whenever I want. I don't have the freedoms that I have. United States does not have the freedoms that we have without you. And thank you so much for putting your life on the line and handling that. I don't think that people understand how dangerous this world is in general and how close to losing our freedoms we can be without people like you doing what you do.
Thank you.
And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So let's talk a bit about national security and UFOs. Now, I'm a huge fan of Tucker Carlson. Anybody who follows me on social media knows this. I just adore him. I think he's really smart and intelligent. And I really kind of was on the fence about UFOs, whether or not they were a real thing, whether or not it was a conspiracy theory, until he started doing segments on it. And Congress got briefed on it, and the briefing included like over 100 reports of UFOs. I was like, wait a minute. So this is like a real thing. But we were in the middle of COVID when a lot of that came out, and it was kind of funny that when those reports came out that people were like, yeah, we kind of figured that. like it didn't seem like people were like as upset as you would think that they would be discovering that UFOs are a thing. Can you tell the audience when the government refers to a UFO, what exactly is it that they're talking about?
So the UFO, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon issue, it includes a lot of different things. There are some UFOs that in certain specific cases, which these are very, very rare, could have been military test aircraft. That does happen, but it's actually very, very rare. And the reason for that is when we test classified military aircraft, there's a reason we have places like China Lake, places in Nevada like Area 51. We have classified test sites set up way out in the boondocks in the desert to make sure that ordinary citizens and uncleared military personnel are not exposed to something they're not about to see. Otherwise, what's the point of having a clandestine or secret test facility? So that does happen occasionally, but vast overwhelming majority of the more exotic UFO sightings, I can promise you they are not our craft. That thing I just described is one of the reasons. So it can involve a lot of other things. There are some cases where there was weather phenomena, meteors, but when I'm going to talk about UFOs here, the ones that I'm talking about are the ones that for decades compartmented branches of U.S. military intelligence have been assigned to track. These are craft that, to say, I'll call them the exotic branch of the UFO phenomena, meaning these craft demonstrate what seem to be capabilities that defy the laws of physics and even defy the laws of gravity and aerodynamics. They can outmaneuver our best craft. They can do things that, when we look at, just seem to blow our mind. We're talking about the type of craft that Luis Elizondo mentioned when he was on Tucker Carlson a few times. And for your listeners, Luis Elizondo was a brilliant Army counterintelligence agent who ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was known as ATIP. It's now become public knowledge. He ran that program. It was really a UFO program. So these are craft that we can track, for example, coming through low Earth orbit, through the atmosphere, going 20 or 30 times the speed of sound, coming to a complete stop above the ocean, which at that speed, coming to a complete stop, a human being in the craft should fly apart and be liquefied. I'm not even sure machinery we build could survive because of the inertia and the sudden stop. These craft can then go into the water, pop back out, and we track these things on radar, and then pop back up into the atmosphere, and we try to lock onto them with our radars. There are certain specific cases where it seems like these things may have the ability to warp space and time, and there's only two things in known physics as far as we understand it, that can warp space and time, and that's a large mass or a planet like the Earth, or a lot of energy. So these things are not always that big, but they seem to have an incredible power source that is just way beyond anything we have. So when I talk about the exotic UFOs, this is what I'm talking about. Now, how does this tie into bigger national security issues and then what goes on with Russia and the Ukraine? They seem like they wouldn't be connected, but here's the thing. One of the announcements that the government has made and the U.S. intelligence community has signed off on is that for decades, the vast majority of these exotic-type UFOs are almost always clustered around military nuclear facilities, or they always show up in decades past in the aftermath of nuclear weapons tests. And we come to find out when the Cold War was originally over in 1992, the Russians were having the exact same problem and same issues at their nuclear test sites in places like Kazakhstan or the Sari Shagan radar facility, which is still one of their test sites they use. And so we know there's clear connections there, and the government has acknowledged that. And you got to wonder, are the nuclear detonations attracting them? Well, I gotta be careful what I say here when I go in depth with this. So first, let me say that because I still hold an active TSSCI security clearance with the DoD, anything I say does not in any way reflect the policy, opinions, or official views of the U.S. government or the U.S. intelligence community. I have to say that.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure that 98.7 The Coast appreciates that as well.
But there is everything I'm going to say here is what I actually am allowed to say, like what I can, because there's a lot of stuff in open source, so I can talk a little bit more. So I'll tell you a story. So when I was working my first contract in Afghanistan when I got out of the Army, and I was actually working for Regional Command South in Afghanistan, there was a gentleman I worked with who had spent most of his career as a U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Officer. A lot of security clearances. He had Q clearances, which are nuclear weapons clearances. And he had spent some time training at places like White Sands when they were building up the THAAD missile system, the Theater High Altitude Aerospace Defense Missile defense system made by Lockheed Martin, incredible piece of hardware. And when he was a young captain, an old colonel came to visit him and the rest of his fellow lieutenants and captains. And they said, "Hey, Colonel, we know you used to work at Area 51. Is all this stuff about aliens true? And, why are the UFOs here?" And this was years and years before all this stuff came out into open source and the government acknowledged the connection between, nuclear weapons and UFOs, or military nuclear assets and UFOs. The colonel poured himself a shot of bourbon, kind of drank about half of it, looked at all the young officers, and he says, "Gentlemen, imagine if you were a sailor, you've been sailing by this primitive island for centuries, not really taking notice, and then all of a sudden you see gunfire going off, lasers shooting in the air, and, red star cluster flares going off. Is that going to shock you and make you want to come down and have a look?" He finished his bourbon, put it down, and got up and walked out. I always had that in the back of my mind. Now, those of us in the intelligence community have always known to some degree that the UFO issue, as far as the exotic UFOs go, are tightly connected to our nuclear assets. And that's out in open source. I mean, Marco Rubio's talked about it.
Yes.
10 years ago, I'd have been in deep kimchi just for saying this out in the open, but now we can talk a little more. But you think, okay, where does this tie into other national security issues? And, if these things are attracted by nuclear detonations, if what that colonel said to my friend is true, then when we have a nuclear detonation above a certain yield, are we potentially attracting the attention of other spacefaring civilizations that may not be friendly? Well, if what that colonel said is true, and given what the military's acknowledged about the connection between these exotic UFOs, nuclear assets, and nuclear tests and nuclear test sites, and given what their maneuvering capabilities are and what type of technology would have to be mastered, you'd have to be able to have an incredible power source and manipulate gravity, what they sometimes call anti-gravity or positive lift. That's something we have to consider. Now, how does that tie into our national security issues we have with Russia? So now I'm going to take a step back and tie it all together for you. So at the end of the Cold War, okay, the Soviet Union collapses. I'm sure you remember it. They go down in just a crashing heap of rubble.
Yes.
And we think to ourselves, "Oorah, kumbaya, happy days are here again." But then something happened within 1 year of the Soviet Union's collapse, something that the RAND Corporation took notice of. The Russians had a 60% drop in birth rate in the space of 1 year. Just like that.
Okay, that's dramatic.
Oh yeah, it is. And so they have a war. Their AIDS epidemic right now is worse than ours. Their healthcare system is a complete, crud show. Their AIDS epidemic's worse. Their tuberculosis is worse. Russian girls often use multiple abortions as a form of birth control. And then to top it all off, when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of their primary exports besides gas and oil were millions upon millions of young, beautiful Russian girls who either fled the country to become mail-order brides or who were trafficked out by the Russian mafia to work in red light districts all over the world. To this day, if you go into a red light district in Europe, it's mostly Ukrainian, Belarusian, or Russian girls that staff those places. Now, the numbers of women that came out like that from Russia and the Soviet Union throughout the 90s was in the millions. I mean, Western law enforcement gave up trying to track it. So millions of young women leave, a 60% drop in birth rate. Run this out for the next 20 or 30 years. What does that do to a country like the size of Russia? Well, it brings them to the edge of extinction, such to the point that right now, by the year 2035 or 2040, Russia will be nothing but a Slavic old folks' home. Okay, the ethnic white Russians are literally dying off as a people, and there's no way they can reverse that, at least no way I can think of. So the Russians, that's one pressure they have on themselves. So look at Russia's history. Going back centuries, they've been invaded multiple times, not just from the south through China and the Mongols, but most of their existential threats they face from invasions came from Western Europe. Think Napoleon, think the German Wehrmacht in World War II. In fact, the Russians lost 27 million people, civilian and military, rolling back the German Wehrmacht when they were invaded in World War II.
27 million?
Yes, ma'am. That's how many they lost, and that's a conservative estimate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They lost more civilians and women and children to starvation at the Battle of Leningrad at the hands of the Nazi SS and the Wehrmacht than all the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines we lost in the entire war, just to kind of put that in perspective. So the Russians, you look at their geography, right, it's huge. It's almost impossible to secure it. So ever since the time of Catherine the Great, the Russians always thought if we are going to survive, we must expand, because the only way they can secure their borders is to advance outside their territory and secure different gaps to make it impossible for an enemy to punch through and get them.
Right.
That's one of the reasons in the Cold War they had Eastern Europe occupied, and we kind of let them do it. And the Russians were, past a certain point, pretty much happy with that because, they had what they wanted. And so in the early years of the Cold War, even with our founding in NATO, there was a gentleman's agreement we had with the old Soviet men in the Kremlin. They were a lot of things, but when I'm pretty sure the Russian GRU might have poisoned Stalin, good riddance. But I'm pretty sure the Russian GRU might have done us a favor by killing him. I'm pretty sure they may have. Some people disagree, but there's evidence that may have happened. Well, when he was gone, the agreement we had after World War II was, the real reason NATO was created was to keep the Americans and the British in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. And we kind of had an agreement with the Russians that we would never let the Germans get too powerful ever again.
Quite honestly, that narrative makes a lot more sense than what we're always told NATO is about. Like that makes a lot more sense.
And the old Soviet men in the Kremlin, who are the Russian deep state, we might call them, the guys who really run the show, it's not the premier or the prime minister like Putin. The guys who run the show are their intelligence chiefs. It's been that way since the time of Peter the Great. It'll never change. So that was kind of what went on behind the scenes in the early years of the Cold War. And as long as the Russians had Eastern Europe as kind of a bulwark with strategic depth and a buffer zone, they really weren't all that worried for the most part. And we had little, tiffs with them here and there, but we were always able to work it out behind the scenes. And the Eastern Europeans and the Western Europeans all knew no matter what happened, there was not going to be a war in Europe unless the men in Washington and the old men in the Kremlin sat down and agreed on it. That's the honest-to-God truth.
Right.
Now, the Russians had some people in their government that got a little bit out of line, including a guy named Mikhail Suslov, who tried to provoke a nuclear war between the superpowers. And when we got evidence of that, we gave it to some people in the Russian GRU. A lot of car bombs went off in Eastern Europe, and nobody saw those guys again. So we did sometimes did sometimes work our issues out in a satisfactory way. Now, the Cold War's over. The Russians have rolled out of Eastern Europe. NATO's been on Russian borders for a long time. And the Russians don't really fear NATO so much because they see NATO for what it is. It's exclusively controlled by the Americans to keep the Germans from having to get too powerful again. And the Russian mindset, as long as NATO's controlled by the U.S., it's not that big of a deal. But as the European Union came together, Germany became drastically more powerful and kind of economically tries to enforce its will on our neighbors. The Russian intelligence analysts, understandably so, look at that and say, hey, the EU is a German-controlled superstate. The last time a German-controlled superstate got on their borders, what happened?
Right. Okay.
Now, the Russians might be exaggerating that potential threat in their minds, but given their history, you see why they see things that way.
Well, I was going to say, that's easy to say unless missiles are pointed at your country.
Exactly.
So different perspective when you're on the receiving end of missiles being pointed at your country.
Oh, most certainly. So they look at things differently, and because they're dying off as a people now, the Russians will never allow any news story in their own media about their dying off as a people to get out because their media is still controlled by the Russian FSB. And it was that way before the communists came around. It'll be that way long after this. But because they're dying off as a people, and in their mindset, the only way they can survive is to conquer and expand and secure their borders. That is just locked into the Russian mentality and the Russian mindset going back centuries. Okay, but here's the problem: regardless of what happens with the war in the Ukraine, Russians are dying off as a people. So 20, maybe 25 or 30 years from now, when the Russians finally are dying off, that means, for example, by the end of this decade, by varying projections, the Russians will not be able to field a military even half the size of the one they have now. By 2040, it'll probably be gone because what's the one thing you have to have security forces and a military? A lot of young men.
Yep.
And they're just not going to have them.
Okay, so, hold that thought. We're up against a hard break. Hold on to that thought. I want you to pick up exactly where you left off. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. We're speaking to Matt Reed about UFOs and the national security issues associated with them. We'll be right back.
Unemployed or underemployed? Have no fear, the TaxMama is here. Fuel your best career move with TaxMama. TaxMama can help you become an IRS enrolled agent with our next live 6-month course beginning in May 2023. Or you can start now with on-demand courses. It's your career on your schedule. Job opportunities are plentiful. TaxMama offers unlimited access to her tax mentoring portal with all the testing materials you need to overcome any test anxiety. Get your 3-year tax education in 6 months and become an IRS enrolled agent through the TaxMama. Visit irsexams.school. That's irsexams.school now to get your best career started today.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. We're speaking with Matt Reed, who is a former active duty Marine, former active duty U.S. Army, and military intelligence. And he is really laying down some very we were talking during the break. My producer and myself were talking during the break about all the things that you have told us so far, Matt. And we're like, that was a lot. That was heavy.
It's a lot to digest.
It is. It's a lot to digest. And, you know, like I said to you in the opening, how like this report came out that I believe it was the Senate got a briefing on the whole UFO thing. I was reading about it today when I was preparing for the show, and it said that, they showed video and it went over 114 reports. And I was like, 114? I thought it was like 5. You know what I mean? And I had no idea that the military had seen it. I just thought it was always like, some strange weirdo out in Arkansas that said they saw a UFO. You know what I mean? No shade to Arkansas. Yeah. I'm just saying. So, like, wouldn't you? But I was stunned by the lack of, like, we find a lot of things a lot more alarming than they found the fact that there's all these unexplained, as you put them, exotic UFOs out here, and it is a security risk. How could it not be?
Sure. Well, so it gets back to the connection between that and the nuclear weapons and national security issues. So when the Russians, as I was saying, they're dying off as a people. When they finally do start to die off and collapse, here's the one thing no one's thinking about. When they die off, what happens to those thousands upon thousands of nuclear weapons the Russians have scattered all over the Russian landmass in Siberia? They're literally up for grabs. Oh my. Okay. That is one of the deepest, darkest national security issues facing myself and my brethren in the intelligence community and the defense industry and the DOD. No one's making the connection, thinking about it. Remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a lot of concern about suitcase nukes or trafficking of small nuclear weapons.
Yes.
That was a major security issue the Clinton administration had to confront. And as Putin and the security oligarchs took back control, that became much less of a concern for us, just because these guys might be SOBs, but they do know how to secure something like a nuke, and they definitely don't like people walking off with their stuff.
Right.
That's one good thing about it. But when they die off, we're not going to be talking about, small, tactical, half a kiloton yield nukes. We're talking about warheads that go on SS-80 Satans, Topol-Ms, 800 kilotons, some warheads in the 1 megaton range. And how do we prepare to contain the fallout and potential nuclear weapons trafficking of a collapsing and dying Russia in the middle of this century? Well, we need assets in Eastern Europe, and we need them in Scandinavia, places like Sweden and Finland, which you notice we're gradually trying to bring the Scandinavians into kind of the what Peter Zeihan, a geopolitical analyst, calls the new Friends and Family program of the U.S.
Yes, because they were for the longest, we don't want to get involved.
Yeah, and so the Finns,
you kind of have to be involved now.
Yeah, the Finns know this problem. They know it's right on their doorstep. So when we said, hey, would y'all like to become really good friends to deal with this problem? The Finns are like, yeah, dude, how many bases you want to build here? Show us where you want to go. So that's part of the reason these things are happening behind the scenes, why we're shifting resources from Europe to Scandinavia. So it's to deal with that long-term problem. Now, because the government has now acknowledged what people in my line of work have known since probably the 1950s or late 40s, that there's a connection between these exotic UFOs, nuclear weapons detonations, and nuclear or military nuclear facilities. If we can't contain the nuclear weapons trafficking coming out of Russia and we end up with God knows who grabbing those bigger, higher yield nukes, and we have a bunch of uncontrolled detonations of nuclear weapons in the megaton or say 800 kiloton, 500 kiloton range, does that attract these same types of UFOs or maybe some that are a little more dangerous? So you see the connection there. And people in organizations like the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and particularly the Department of Energy has a lot of good intel folks in it. That is where those two issues connect. And you look at the size of that problem and how seemingly mind-boggling it is, what a gargantuan task it is. If you step back and think about that, a lot of the things you see the intelligence community and the U.S. military do overseas that don't always seem to make sense, it all starts to make so much more sense.
Well, yeah, it definitely does. And, you know, what worried me about the intelligence briefing on UFOs that happened in the Senate is, first of all, half of it was a closed briefing. And I felt like they told the public a lot in the open briefing. So I'm like, what in the world did they tell those senators in the closed briefing? And do we know, like, does the government know how much imminent danger we could possibly be in? Because, you know, we don't have anything to match the technology that's being seen.
Well, there are some indications we may have made weapon systems that can bring them down. So here's something that's going to be a little bit of a wild ride. So how do I approach this? So you remember Ronald Reagan and the Star Wars defense program, right?
Yeah, and everybody thought he was an idiot. And now it's like the best thing. It's like the best thing ever now, right?
Here, one of the incidents that made him go public with that were actually some UFO incidents that happened over our missile silos and simultaneously happened over some Russian nuclear facilities in 1983 that almost sparked a nuclear war. And that was never talked about in the press.
They didn't tell us that part. Don't remember hearing that part.
Now, they did. A lot of it's been declassified. You can Google the name of a Russian missile defense officer named Stanislav Petrov. There's a lot of open source information on it now. But it shook a lot of people up. Now, here's the odd thing. So in 1997, a book came out by a retired Army intelligence officer named Philip Corso. He's a lieutenant colonel. So he wrote a book called The Day After Roswell. Now, here's the funny thing about Colonel Corso. He was the first person to write about the UFO phenomenon from within the government and the military intelligence community. So a little background on him. Philip Corso was a U.S. Army counterintelligence officer in World War II. He was such a lethal counterintelligence officer that the Nazi SS spent a ton of money trying to assassinate him in Rome, and he just kept killing all their guys every time he caught them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Back he executed a lot of people. He built a network of assassins with the help of the Vatican and the Mafia. You know, he was Italian and spoke Italian.
Hold on. You're just gonna gloss over that. Did you just say with the help of the Vatican and the mob?
Yes, he did. There's even a book in Italy called Philip Corso and the Vatican. He became a celebrity in Italy when his book The Day After Roswell came out in 1997. But what he did, he was also Catholic, obviously, but he worked with the Vatican. He wasn't just killing Nazi spy networks. He was killing the ones the Russians were running when we and the Russians were supposed to be allies. Corso told the Russians, I know y'all are trying to steal some of our stuff, back off. The communist agents didn't do it, so Corso just killed all of them. So he was Pretty tough, pretty ruthless man, but here's where it gets interesting. In 1961, he was brought into the Pentagon to run something called the U.S. Army's Foreign Technology Desk. And he answered directly to a famous Army intelligence officer named Arthur Trudeau. Now, what Corso said in his book, this is what he said. The Foreign Technology Desk, if you look at how it was set up like a deep black program where you have a classified stated purpose, and then underneath that is the deeper real purpose only one or two people in the program are aware of. So what their mission was to do ostensibly was to do kind of what Army Futures Command does now. Look for bits of technology around the world, innovations, inventions, stuff we might steal from another military, and see if we can integrate it into Army weaponry, for future technology and weapons development. But what Corso says their real purpose was, and what he said in the book, is that they had a what he called the nut file. It was a bunch of wreckage they pulled from the Roswell crash and another one that happened soon thereafter. And Trudeau, according to what Corso said, told him, figure out what this stuff is and can you reverse engineer it. Now, we can corroborate some of what Corso said, because here's the interesting thing, Mel, and you can confirm this if you want. If you study the history of inventions like fiber optics, lasers, night viewing devices, and the integrated circuit, there were a lot of different laboratories around the country working on those programs funded by the DoD. But there were quantum leaps made in each one of those inventions in the space of about 2 years that just mystified the world scientists. They were just flabbergasted at the advances the Army made, and they did it all in about 2.5 years. Every single one of those inventions was also being worked on in a laboratory in Fort Belvoir that fell directly underneath U.S. Army Research and Development, which is what the Foreign Technology Desk fell under.
Okay.
Now, when Corso's book came out, the U.S. news media laughed at it. But the European news outlets dug a little deeper. They went and found a bunch of engineers that worked for Hughes, Bell, and Textron Labs that had been retired. And a lot of your non-disclosure agreements you sign in the defense industry or the intelligence community, sometimes they do expire after 25 or 30 years.
Wait, what?
And some of them do, depending on what the program is. They're not always for life.
Oh.
If you live, you can't, it is possible if you live to be really, really old to outlive those NDAs. It just doesn't happen very often. So when the European news outlets interview these engineers, they picked Colonel Corso's picture from Army intelligence out of a lineup and said, yeah, that's General Trudeau's man. They said, well, what do you remember about him? They said, well, he brought us these devices that were radically advanced, like nothing we could have imagined, and asked us if we can do anything with it. And we used the technology, or what he brought to us, to key off of. Now, when these quantum leaps were made at these laboratories, a number of the world's scientists, in fact, the Russian intelligence services, it was revealed in 1985, had come to the conclusion that those inventions could not have had the quantum leaps they had in the early 60s unless U.S. intelligence had something more advanced to key off of. That was the unanimous conclusion of the Russian intelligence services by the late 60s. That's no longer a secret. That's been out for a long time. So Corso writes this book. One of the controversial claims that he made that people laughed at was recently declassified and revealed to be true. So he said in his book, he was one of the men who met with President Reagan before they announced SDI, Star Wars Defense.
Uh-huh.
And Corso said that in early 1989, the U.S. Air Force tested what they called a particle beam weapon on 2 separate occasions. They fired the housing or whatever it was on a rocket. The military's had its own separate. This confirms the military's had its own separate space asset, separate from the space shuttle for decades. I mean, this information's out there. I can't believe no one's grabbing onto it.
Okay, go ahead.
So that was Corso's claim. Now, Colonel Corso claimed in that book that they tested a particle beam weapon twice and knocked down 2 targets outside the atmosphere, I think in somewhere near low Earth orbit. Now, people laughed at it. Well, back in 2017, the U.S. Air Force and Los Alamos National Laboratory announced and declassified the fact that we had successfully tested 2 particle beam weapons in, guess what, April of 1989, by putting them on something called BEAR, which stood for Beam Accelerator Aboard a Rocket. They had their own shuttle. They fired it up into space, shot the weapon off at a target, brought it back down, and then did it a second time. And that's actually been in some open source defense industry publications like the Drive.com. They had a really extensive write-up. And in fact, if you go to the Los Alamos National Laboratory Museum, one of the components of that weapon system, something called a radio frequency quadrupole, is out there on display. And that was declassified a few years ago. It goes right over everyone's heads, even though it's out there in open source defense industry news sites. I'm like, that just confirms one of Colonel Corso's claims, which means regardless of what you think about what else he said or what the UFOs are, we can't dismiss the man as crazy anymore with everything else that he said, because a lot of other controversial things that he said turned out to be true.
Okay. All of that is really wild, but makes complete sense. Like, makes total and complete sense. Like, and I don't know if you watched when the Senate came out of their briefing, when they came out of the closed briefing, but I was looking at like the senators' faces. This is what I was looking at, and they looked legitimately freaked out. Like they looked, and it's not the first intelligence briefing that they've ever had. They've had other intelligence briefings and whatnot. But you've also, we're coming to the close of the hour, and I know that you've written, I think 6 books.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'd love for you to tell people the name of the books, where they can find them, and that kind of thing.
So the first big novel I wrote is called In the Death of Night 2.0. And what that's about, it's about a retired CIA case officer named Bill Carpenter who manipulates and leverages a Russian organized crime group in Houston into slaughtering and killing Islamic terrorists and foreign spies from Iran, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. And the way he does that, he has his own private security firm called Mercury Securities, and they have a contract to do what we call technical surveillance countermeasures work for different law enforcement agencies. And we call it bug sweeping sometimes. And what Carpenter does is he has his technicians hide these listening devices in all the rooms and operation centers of Houston Police, FBI, ATF, Immigration, Customs, all those guys, so he knows everything they're doing. He goes to this Russian mafia syndicate, which is actually run by former KGB, former Russian Red Army guys, and he says, look, I can tell you if, when, how, why, and where the cops and the feds are going to move on you way in advance on one condition. He says, I got all this known or this surveillance data on known suspected Islamic terrorists and foreign spies living in Houston. And I want you to use your hitmen, your ex-GRU Spetsnaz guys, Stasi enforcers, to slaughter them and kill them. I want them butchered, nice, and violent. And for U.S. citizens that we're going to assassinate, here's some money, wash it through your laundry rackets, and hire, say, South Africans who have files that are not available to U.S. law enforcement necessarily and can make the deaths look accidental. And that's the basic plot. And it's based on something we did in World War II where we used the Italian mafia to kill off all the spies that Germans and Italians had in the U.S. in World War II. That is really wild. Like, all of that is super wild. And those books can be found on Amazon, yes? Yes, and I had other books I've written. I wrote a military sci-fi time travel novel called The Time Killers, which is about a group of U.S. military intelligence operatives who are, Gen Xers like myself, who, in the aftermath of a war between the U.S. and China that goes really bad, they figure out a way with the black program they're working on at Kirtland Air Force Base with the help of an alien they've retrieved from a crash site. They go back in time to the late 80s and early 90s to assassinate 4 people to change the course of history and potentially stop the war from ever happening. And it's kind of like a cross between the Terminator and Stranger Things, where you're going back to that late 80s, early 90s culture, but you're seeing it through the eyes of Gen X or war veterans who have gone back in time to assassinate 4 different people. Whoa.
That's incredible. Well, Matt Reed, we're coming to the close of the hour. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. So much great information. Make sure I will send you a link when the show is posted at a podcast. You can put on your social media. If you're just joining us and missed this hour, you'll definitely want to check out the podcast with guest Matt Reed. Some really great information. Thank you so much, sir. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
You do the same, ma'am. God bless you.
Yeah, bless you.
Thank you.
Unemployed or underemployed? Have no fear. The TaxMama is here. Fuel your best career move with TaxMama. TaxMama can help you become an IRS enrolled agent with our next live 6-month course beginning in May 2023. Or you can start now with on-demand courses. It's your career on your schedule. Job opportunities are plentiful. TaxMama offers unlimited access to her tax mentoring portal with all the testing materials you need to overcome any test anxiety. Get your 3-year tax education in 6 months and become an IRS enrolled agent through the TaxMama. Visit irsexams.school. That's irsexams.school now to get your best career started today.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. I'd like to thank my guests, Marcie Friesner and Matthew Reed. I want to thank Sam, ran the boards perfectly this evening. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for listening to Money Talk with Melanie and listening to this as a podcast. I also want to make sure that I thank Eva Rosenberg, a.k.a. the TaxMama. Make sure you check out her website, irs.school. And she is fabulous. You want to avail yourself of her services. And I want you to remember that all of this is important because, after all, it's your money.